Is Russia's economy finally about to collapse? For more than 2 years now, we have heard the same prediction again and again, that Russia is running out of money, that sanctions will break the Russian economy, that we just need to wait a few months, and yet every single time these predictions have failed. But now a new and seemingly convincing narrative has emerged. Oil prices are falling, Russia's budget deficit is rising, military spending is exploding, and even Western policymakers are openly saying that this war has become a race not just on the battlefield, but in economics as well. As U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently said, we are now in a race between how long the Ukrainian military can hold up versus how long the Russian economy can hold up. So the big question is, are we finally close to the moment when Russia's war economy collapses? What makes this moment especially interesting is that this time it is not just random commentators making the prediction. Many highly respected Western economists, people who have been wrong before, yes, but who are still very serious experts, are now once again warning that Russia's war economy is unsustainable and heading for a crash. And yet here you are listening to an economist on YouTube telling you something uncomfortable, that if we actually look at history, real historical war economies, there are surprisingly few signs that Russia's economy is about to collapse anytime soon. In fact, if we compare Russia today with historical examples like Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, or even the United States during the Vietnam War, Russia's war economy does not look exhausted at all. It looks like it is just getting started. To understand why, we need to step back and ask a simple question. Why has Russia's economy surprised almost everyone so far? Because since the invasion of Ukraine, Russia's economy has not only survived, it has actually outperformed several major European economies, including the UK and Germany. And that alone should already make us pause. So what did most analysts miss? In my view, the biggest mistake was that they were trained to understand peacetime economies, not war economies, and those two follow very different rules. To understand what is happening in Russia, we need a quick War Economics 101 lesson. Let us start with the basics. What exactly is a war economy? In simple terms, a war economy is an economy whose primary goal is no longer maximizing consumer welfare, but maximizing military capability. The entire national focus shifts away from what is best for individual citizens and toward what is best for the war effort. Now, of course, in the long run, war is terrible for an economy. Destruction, death, and lost productivity are economically devastating. But in the short run, and short run in economics can mean many years, war economies often experience rapid GDP growth. This sounds counterintuitive, but history shows it again and again. Before World War II, Britain saw a major economic boost from rearmament. Nazi Germany experienced massive growth during its militarization phase, and the US economy truly took off only once it fully mobilized for war. Even more surprisingly, during the early phase of a war economy, ordinary civilians often become richer, not poorer. And that explains something that shocked many observers. After Russia invaded Ukraine, average life satisfaction in Russia actually rose to an all-time high. Yes, despite unprecedented sanctions, despite hundreds of thousands of deaths, and despite mass emigration, the Russian economy boomed, and many Russians became better off on average. This apparent contradiction only makes sense when we look at it through the lens of war economics. To understand why war initially boosted Russia's economy, we need to focus on one key idea: mobilizing unused domestic resources under international constraints. Before the war, Russia's economy was operating far below its potential. Large numbers of workers were unemployed or underemployed, and many factories were idle or underutilized. In peacetime, this inefficiency was tolerated. In wartime, it is unacceptable. So the first phase of a war economy is about activating unused resources. Russia did this by massively increasing government spending, by drawing down its wealth and injecting new money into the economy, and by pushing unemployed workers into factories that were previously idle. Now you might think that printing money and spending more will cause inflation, but not necessarily. Basic monetary theory tells us that if new money leads to new production, inflation does not have to rise. If unemployed workers start producing goods in idle factories, you end up with more money and more output at the same time. That is exactly what happened in Russia in 2022. Government spending exploded, unemployment collapsed, and industrial output surged. This is the same pattern we saw in major economies preparing for war in the 1930s. But this raises an important question. Why do countries only activate unused resources during war? Why not do this in peacetime? To answer that, we need to look at Russia's pre-war economy through the lens of the monetary trilemma. In the early 2000s, Russia wanted three things: a rapidly growing capitalist economy, free movement of capital, and a stable currency. The problem is that you can only have two of these three at the same time. Russia chose free capital flows and economic openness, which meant the ruble had to float freely and be determined by market forces. This worked until it did not. In 2013, Vladimir Putin appointed Elvira Nabiullina as head of the Central Bank of Russia. Around that time, the US had just crushed Iran's currency by targeting foreign investment, triggering a currency run. Russia learned from that example and adopted the so-called Fortress Russia strategy. The goal was simple: prevent a currency collapse at all costs. The central bank intervened heavily in currency markets, buying foreign currencies from exports and investments and building up massive foreign reserves, Putin's famous war chest. But this strategy came with a trade-off. To accumulate foreign currency while keeping capital flowing freely, Russia had to reduce imports. The easiest way to reduce imports was to make Russians slightly poorer than they otherwise could have been. Government spending was kept tight, interest rates were kept relatively high, and consumption was suppressed. In hindsight, Fortress Russia failed in a crucial way. Those foreign reserves were not gold bars in Moscow vaults. They were financial assets held in Western jurisdictions. When the war started, the West froze them. The ruble collapsed, and capital fled. The strategy seemed to have failed completely. And yet, this is where Nabiullina showed extraordinary pragmatism. To save the ruble, she had only two options: cut spending even further, which was impossible during wartime, or introduce capital controls. She chose capital controls. By restricting money flows out of Russia, the government regained control over the economy. Russians technically had money, but they could not freely spend it on imports. This single move changed everything. It allowed Russia to fully activate its domestic economy without triggering a balance of payments crisis. And this is the key reason why Russia's economy has not collapsed. To understand why this matters so much, we need to look at how economies actually collapse. Historically, there are four main paths. The first and most common is sudden capital flight. Financial crises, trade deficits, or sanctions trigger a collapse. Russia eliminated this risk with capital controls. The second path is being cut off from crucial imports like food or energy. Russia is largely self-sufficient and has reliable trade partners like China and India. The third path is excessive debt, housing bubbles, banking collapses, and uncontrolled money printing. But Russia's government debt and household debt remain exceptionally low. The fourth path is social collapse, when economic pain becomes politically unbearable. Russia is now entering phase 2 of its war economy. Growth is slowing, inflation is high, and real sacrifices are beginning. Historically, phase 2 is where governments tighten control, civilian industries are sacrificed, freedom is reduced, and price and wage controls are introduced. So far, Russia has used only one major war tool: capital controls. But signs are emerging that more are coming, including discussions of price controls on essentials and tighter labor allocation. Will this hurt public opinion? Yes. But Russia's public support for the war remains high, and its authoritarian system allows it to absorb far more discontent than democracies. This is why waiting for Russia's economy to collapse is a dangerous illusion. Russia still has room to escalate economically and is far from the extreme war mobilization levels seen in historical cases. This does not mean Russia is invincible. Sanctions hurt, labor shortages hurt, and infrastructure attacks hurt. But it does mean that time alone will not stop Russia's war machine. If the West wants Ukraine to survive, it cannot rely on economic collapse as a strategy. It must actively support Ukraine economically, militarily, and politically. That is my analysis. But now I want to know what you think. Do you agree with this view, or do you think Russia is much closer to collapse than it appears? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below because I read them all. And if you want more clear, balanced, and data-driven breakdowns of global economics and geopolitics like this one, stay connected because many more such deep dives are coming.